I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Vocalo Books Paddington to everyone, and a special welcome back to Miss Fiona Higgins as we launch her second book and debut novel, The Mother's Group. Tonight is a really special book launch as we host one of Australia's most esteemed and well-known journalists, Ellen Fanning, in conversation with Fiona. And I know that I'm excited to watch this great talk, so without further ado, can we please have a round of applause for Ellen Fanning and Fiona Higgins.
That's a lot to live up to, Fiona. Don't panic. Thank you, George. Can I start by telling you all, friends, what a revelation this book is? I so enjoyed reading it. We don't see much about motherhood that's written. There's lots and lots about giving birth, far more, I suspect, than you would ever want to know. And you can find it even in a sophisticated inner-city bookshop like this one. I went and spoke to young Ben, who's, 25? At the front desk, and he pointed me to this one, which he says really is the book to get. Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. Very spiritual book, that one. And Ben said it really was the best, although I'm not sure quite how he knows that. Ben then pointed me to the whole parenting section downstairs, what to expect in the toddler years, which I told him was subtitled Brace Yourself. And he said, no, I don't think it is actually. There's also the slap, which is terrific, which is not in the parenting section. And then when you get to the front desk for the impulse buyers, there's this one, which didn't come up in the computer because there's some letters missing in the title. And it's on the frustrations of parenthood for those of you who know it. It's okay to laugh at this, but as Fiona and I have been discussing, you really are invited to have a genuine look at real feelings of maternal rage and frustration and distress and discontent, which I think is why Fiona's book is such a revelation and something of a liberation, I think. Many of you will know that it focuses on the life of 6 members of a Northern Beaches mothers group, and while the subject matter is challenging, it's also, I assure you, a thumping good read. My children were very neglected while I read it. There's a cliffhanger of an ending, which I promise we won't give away tonight. So I'm going to talk to Fiona for a bit, and I'd really like it if we could hear some of your questions, because I know you'll have lots, and often the best questions come out at the table when the writer signs later, but if we could all hear them, that'd be great. You might want to explore the differences for those who've read Love in an Age of Drought between the writing of that book and the writing of the novel. Perhaps you'll want to ask her, as I did, how on earth she pulled this off with 2.5 and then 3 children under the age of 5. So we will come to your questions, but Fiona and I decided that we would have a bit of a rattle through of some of the taboos that she looks at in the book. So I'll be quiet and just start by asking Fiona. The first character we meet is Ginny, and she's this tough corporate lawyer that you try not to identify with, and she meets these other 5 women in the mothers group, and she's immediately judgmental. She's looking around at one and saying, oh, bring on the flower power, you know. And I think that was the first keen observation of the book for me, the way women and mothers judge each other. Tell me a bit about Jenny and that idea.
Yeah, well, Ginny's 39, so she's an older mother, I guess, by some standards, and she has had this incredible professional life prior to coming to motherhood, and so she brings a pretty brittle kind of perspective to the mothers group when she first meets these other women. But part of her journey in the novel is really to arrive at a place of perhaps less judgment. She learns to moderate those natural judgmental feelings that she has at the beginning.
There's also the idea that she struggles with, that motherhood should somehow come naturally, that it's a natural process, that it's all very natural, and somehow if it doesn't come naturally to you, then you're one of life's failures. And I think other women impose that on one another, don't they, when they judge each other's parenting and judge them, the mother in particular.
Yeah, not only other women, I think we do that to ourselves. Mothers do that all the time. So expectations and judgment are a real theme in this novel. Because I believe that, you know, we really need to attempt to release some of the expectations that we apply to ourselves as mothers and to other mothers.
And I wonder when those expectations developed, because it probably wasn't that way for our mothers. I'm not sure that they thought about it in those terms. It's come along at the same time as the second wave of feminism in a strange sort of a way.
Maybe. But, you know, I would also say that, I'd also argue that irrespective of sort of where you find yourself, socioeconomically, or what era you might be raising your children in, there is a certain universality to mothering, and you know, a lot of it is a tough daily grind. You know, it's not a Johnson & Johnson commercial, whether you're, you know, a 1970s mum or whether you're a 21st century mum.
There's another critical character in the book called Miranda, and for me, you are really taking it to the edge. She's got this 3-year-old stepson, Digby, who would, you know, push anybody's buttons, really. You know, if Digby actually exists in the world, we're going to see him in the courts in 20 years' time. and dare I say that this rage boils up in Miranda. Talk about the 2 incidents where that happens.
Yeah, well, Miranda herself is an interesting character because she, for all intents and purposes, seems to have this perfect life. You know, she has the big house and the big rock and the big man, really, to sort of look after her, if you like. Although she had her own interests and professional life before coming to mothering. But part of her problem is that this perfect life is fraying at the edges, and one of the reasons for that is, of course, her demanding toddler stepson, Digby, and the incidents in which Miranda loses control involves Digby pushing the boundaries, as any toddler does. One incident, he scales the counter of a cafe and sort of barks rudely at the charming, ageing Italian barista. And, you know, we've all been there. Well, I have. And then in another incident, it's more extreme. He throws a knife at his sibling. And so Miranda, understandably, boils up. She is enraged by her child, and he is her child. You know, and this theme of maternal distress and rage is something that I wanted to look at, because I think that as a society we're pretty uncomfortable with mothers feeling that way. We know it happens, but you know, it's quite distressing because motherhood is sacred ground, really.
And was that hard to write about? Because everyone's going to see you in this book and say, which character are you, you know?
Yes, and my response would be, you know, I'm all of them and I'm none of them. Because, you know, on a bad day in my household, I'm Ginny. I'm pretty brittle and nasty. And on a good day, I'm Made, the sort of young Indonesian character in the book.
Who are you today?
Look, interestingly, I was liberated from motherhood today. I mean, at this time of night, what am I usually doing? Not this.
But I do wonder, is it hard to write that down?
Yeah. Look,
it's almost, you almost feel a little shameful, don't you, reading it? And you were saying to me, Ellen, if you don't like this book, don't launch it, and it's all right not to like it. Was that part of what you were worried about in my response to it?
Yes. I mean, I think the book is full on, and it's honest, and it's. I wanted it to be honest. I didn't want to shy away from any of these uncomfortable emotions that I know many mothers feel, but we don't like to confess, and we certainly don't talk about. So that was the reason I wrote it, as a liberation, as a way to, you know, if not encourage people to talk about it, because it may still be too hard, to at least allow people, and particularly mothers who read this book, to not feel alone. There's a great C.S. Lewis quote: "We read to not feel alone." So that was part of the reason I wrote these full-on characters.
And I would not like to leave the audience with the impression that, you know, this is some difficult book to get through, because it's this wonderful narrative that swings you around the whole way, and you really can't put this book down. And in part because it is a relief to read a lot of this thing, because I think every mother feels a lot of these things, and you're not allowed to discuss it. You're allowed to discuss, can you have it all? You're allowed to discuss that. That's fine. You're allowed to discuss work-life balance. You know, you're allowed to discuss, can you have it all, and simple little ideas like that. And I think we're somewhat constrained, aren't we, by the parameters that those conversations allow for.
Yes. Yes, and I'm less interested in that question of can we have it all, and more interested in the question of can we as a society cope with the reality of the flawed mother? Because I think it's very discomforting.
There's another character in the book who she secretly drinks, and I think we're familiar with. So you think this is water, don't you?
That's right. This is vodka.
That's why we're finishing at 7. And I think we're familiar with this stereotype from, well, in your book it's not a stereotype, it's something new, but there is a stereotype of the 50s woman who perhaps washes down the couple of Valium with a scotch, or the one Valium with a couple of scotch before the kids get home, whichever order. But it is a kind of a touchy subject to explore with modern mothers who might recognise the cycle of having a couple of wines, and maybe more than a couple of wines at night, people are nodding, I won't call their names, at night, to feel more able to cope, which renders you less able to cope the next day because you're hungover or seedy or sleep deprived and seedy or whatever it is. Dusty is the word I use. Dusty. You never hear that discussed much.
It's telling us something about you know, the sheer drudgery of life that drives some women, not all women, but some women, to needing to self-medicate. And that's a shame. Why should we have to self-medicate with something that's supposed to be, that societal norms would have us believe is just sheer rhapsody and wonder?
And yet we imagine that you know, within the template of the conversation that we're sort of allowed to have, or we imagine ourselves into, that somehow life, while very much more frustrating, was simpler because in the past, if women weren't working, then they had less to juggle, and somehow their lives were perhaps more, they were more frustrated, but lives were less complex. So why would we be having this? Why would this still be the case now? Have you thought about that?
Not in any depth, Ellen.
Is it about just that, whatever the age and whatever else is going on, mothering is more complex and more difficult than most women are prepared for?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
The character of Marde is the other one I want to talk about, and she is my favourite character, and I now aspire to be Marde, which is very disconcerting for our 7-year-old Peter, who just keeps looking at me like, you think? What? You're being this lovely sort of very zen woman, Mum, and I'm finding it very scary. I like the old mum. But the way you've drawn Marde, she's an Indonesian woman, as you said before. She's a young woman. She's married to an older Australian man, and yet she's a finely drawn character. She's not a caricature of some happy, simple Asian woman, you know, ever content with her lot. That's not who she is. And I guess you use her as a device, a counter to this Western malaise about this pursuit of happiness, which is foremost for a lot of us. Where did this woman come from?
Well, practically speaking, you know, I have a background in Indonesian studies, and I've spent some time in Indonesia. I lived there, and you know, it's a culture that I know and love and have a lot of admiration for some of the reasons that, you know, you've alluded to, Ellen. But on a second level, where did she come from? Literally, like all of the other characters in this book, literally they just turned up in my head. Now, obviously, they are composites of my life experience, but I wrote this book over a period of about 14 months, most of it in a year. And it was the most sleep-deprived period of my life. You know, I had a lovely but, you know, desperately difficult second child who just simply refused to sleep. And so I was, you know, I'd often be up at night breastfeeding, and, you know, 5 or 6 times a night for 14 months. And, you know, my head would literally be lolling around on my shoulders, and snippets of stories and these women just sort of turned up in my head, and Made was one of them. And in fact, Made was the second person to turn up. The first person to turn up was Cara, in fact, whom I end the book with. She was the first one, and she, you know, a lot of people who have read the book comment to me that she's the nice one, she's the lovely one, the uncomplicated one. And it's interesting to me that she was the one who arrived first in my head, because I suspect she was easiest to write because she had the least number of issues or complexities. And then Made came second, and again, she was lovely in so many ways. And if I had to pick a favourite, I would pick Made too. You know, I loved writing her. I loved learning about her background, because it was seriously revealed to me over a period of many, many sleepless nights, and it was the most unusual creative experience of my life.
Did you set out to write a novel? Did you think, this is it, I'm going to write a novel?
No, I didn't. So I think it was clearly writing as therapy. It started as writing as therapy. It was catharsis on some level. And then I was 4 characters in, about you know, 75% of the way through, and I thought, hang on, the characters their lives started to intersect and connect, and I realised that I was writing a novel. And I contacted my agent, Virginia Lloyd, and said to her, I think I'm writing a novel, but I'm not sure. Can you please have a look at this draft and tell me if you think I'm writing a novel too? Because I've never written a novel before. And she got back to me and said, yep, you're writing a novel.
And the structure of the book, for those who've read it, so you've got 6 women, and you've got to have an exposition of each of these 6 women. And I sort of looked through the chapters and thought, look, she started each chapter with how on earth is she going to make that work? How is she going to evolve the narrative while she's still introducing them all? And that seemed to me a real high wire act that you, I was delighted to discover, pulled off really well. How hard was that?
Look, I don't recall it as being terribly hard, and I'm not being glib here. It was truly a very unusual creative process. I would hop back into, and Stu, my beautiful husband up there, will attest to the fact that I would crawl back into bed absolutely shattered, and I'd nudge him and say, you know what, Bill is going to do X. You know, I've just discovered
And he'd say?
He'd go, oh my Lord, she's going mad. You know. So I can't explain it. I used the tools of the trade, if you like. Once I'd spoken to Virginia, my agent, and she had said, you know, actually you should keep going. And I started devising a character map and looking at, okay, well, how do their lives intersect, and where is this going? Because when I did contact Virginia, I didn't have a clear ending in my mind. So I needed to go through a number of further drafts, if you like, to get to the point where I had a vision for the ending.
So back to Made, who is a great tool in the book, and it's interesting that she came to you when you were so sleep deprived and at the toughest time of motherhood, really. What does she reflect to us about our Western expectations of motherhood and life as a woman?
Well, I think Made is probably the happiest character in the novel, precisely because she doesn't bring the sorts of expectations to her life and to mothering that some of the other characters do, and I think that's pretty much it with Made. She carries herself through her life with a dignity that's born of you know, a true tolerance and a patience.
But she has different expectations of life,
Yes,
doesn't she?
She does.
She doesn't expect to be riotously happy every day.
No.
And when she's not happy, it's not like she's tickety-boo with that. You know, she hasn't necessarily, I don't want to give too much away, married the man of her dreams. She hasn't necessarily got the perfect life, and she feels all of that. But I guess what it reflects back to us is, what is it as women that we're expecting life to be once we get a house, a partner and children, and what is it that we're not finding in that? Is that the message from it?
Very much so. Very much so.
Finally, I want to touch on this idea of what conversations you want women to have out of this. And it'll be fascinating to see, because Fiona will be in... I can never know whether it's Gundawindi or Gundawindi.
It's Gundy.
It's Gundy. And where's that?
A long way away.
It's
on the border of Queensland and New South Wales, up in the northwest.
Okay, so this is interesting. You're going to be in the Gundy Library tomorrow.
Yes, Gundy Library at 11 a.m. tomorrow.
So I can't imagine that there's a huge amount competing with that. Not that it's not fascinating to come along and hear you speak, don't get me wrong. But what do you expect those women who are isolated themselves just by geography as well as perhaps by motherhood to bring to you? And what have you already had out of the social media?
Yes. Well, look, I don't know is the answer to that. I mean, particularly with rural audiences, I think they will be different to metropolitan audiences. I suspect that this book is probably more of a metropolitan book. But that said, I think mothering is a universal, activity for those who engage in it. So I don't know what the Gundy mothers will think or will bring. But I suspect that they will find something of themselves in at least one of the characters. I suspect most women will find something that resonates with them, or I hope so. And that is my hope, and it comes back to, that idea of we read to know we're not alone. I hope that, if nothing else, this book stimulates some conversations and perhaps offers some connection and comfort for women who might not, for whatever reason, be able to articulate that what they're feeling is, what they're feeling.
And they're not the first one to feel it.
They're not the first one and they're not the last.
We have some time for questions now, and I know there'll be questions in the audience. I'm going to wait patiently. There's a question over here.
Do you have any projection of where you think these mothers go when their kids are at school, in the sense that does Mayday turn into Tiger Mum? Does corporate mum turn into let's just outsource everything to nanny and do every possible activity after school? And, do you have any idea of that sort of thing?
It's it's very interesting that you say that, because I feel like I know these women now. I feel like they arrived in my life and they befriended me, and I've had the privilege of writing them up, and I'm very sad to sort of let them go at the end of the novel. So I do think about what they're doing now. I haven't thought as far ahead as, how do they all behave at, when they're school age, but I think it would be a really interesting thing to explore, and, I wouldn't write off the possibility of ever exploring it in the future if that was something that came to me. But it would have to be the book that I wanted to write, this book I wanted to write, and it arrived, it visited itself upon me, and that's what would have to happen with some sort of follow-up, I guess.
Yeah. Down the back, there's a question.
Yes, Mr. Fairfax.
You've said to me that I'm not the target audience. Why is it that you don't want men to understand more about motherhood?
You know what? I do. And I think you should buy a copy, and several for your mates. But honestly, I think you should buy a copy for Libby, and then I think you should read it, when she's not looking, because I think men could gain something from reading this work, and they could certainly gain something from reading the book and then having a conversation with their wives about it, wives or partners. I would love it if men read the book, and I've been surprised that for those who have, how they've enjoyed it. You know, I had a 50-year-old male from Tasmania contact me the other day saying, I read my wife's copy, and you know, the release date is today, so I don't understand how all of these people have copies. And you know, he's recommending it to his friends. Great insight into, you know, the struggles of sort of early childhood that for him are quite a distant memory.
But tell everybody what you were telling me earlier about, there have been a few tweets here and there and interesting things from people who've got their hands on this book.
Yes, I don't know how it happens, and I'm quite Jurassic in that, you know, I've only sort of entered the world of social media, you know, and I'm not doing it particularly effectively, as my mother's group would attest. But there has, you know, there's somebody in over in an Australian-based Hollywood actress tweeted about my book yesterday, and you know, she has 23,000 followers, and she's this gorgeous 25-year-old woman who doesn't have a baby, and she tweeted, I don't know whether I'm just baby crazy, but I'm loving Fiona Higgins' mother's group, which I just thought was, you know, just surreal and lovely.
When the book goes into the world. Are there other questions? Down the back.
Fiona, how do you expect your own mother's group to respond to
Yes, how do you expect your own mother's... Now, the members of your mother's group are here.
Yes, they're all sitting in the front row here.
Just
so
stick your hands up in the air.
You can actually ask them yourself.
This is your mother's group in the front?
Yeah, that's right.
Who's the boozer? Sorry.
Just cover your wines, ladies. No, well, as you can imagine, it could have been incredibly awkward because I had started writing this, you know, as for catharsis. I didn't know what I was writing. And then 75% of the way through, I thought, oh, it's a novel, and hey, it's about a mother's group. But I didn't want to talk to my close friends in my mother's group about it until it was clear that, in fact, it was going to be published, because it seemed like, you know, a useless proposition for me to tell them about what I was writing unless it was actually going to be any sort of publication. I was really anxious about it because I was afraid that even though I had very firmly said this is a work of fiction, that, you know, when I said to them, you know, I'm having a novel published and the working title is The Mother's Group, they would all roll their eyes and possibly, you know, assault me. So, but wonderfully, they didn't. But just to make sure, I gave them an early draft of the work and invited their feedback when there was still time to change things. So if my fear of them finding themselves in the work was to come true, I could potentially do something to change that, because you know, their opinion matters to me, and that's part of, you know, the reason why the work evolves in the way it does. I mean, apart from treating some of the dark issues, it also treats the really key theme of friendship and the transformative and healing power of female friendship at a really vulnerable time of your life, and that's what I've experienced in my mother's group. You know, I count them amongst my best friends, and I'm just going to cry into my microphone now. I'm really glad you said that, actually, because that was a key theme that we didn't touch on, and the surprising nature of it. In my mind, it's kind of the parallel of when your children go to school and look at the other person and go, hi, you're 5, I'm 5, you're a boy, I'm a boy. We could be best friends. And it's kind of what happens at that key moment of your life. If you strike a good group of women, it's just a joy, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. You literally walk into the early childhood health centre and you say, hi, I've just had a baby, you've just had a baby, let's be friends. And, you know, that's a very interesting group dynamic because everybody's very diverse. Any other questions? Up the back, the gentleman up the back.
Are you ever visited by fathers, and will there be fathers?
That's very good. Are you ever visited by male characters, fathers' characters, and will there be a father's book? Yeah, I think that's a great question, and fathers and partners appear in this work, but you know, Stu, my husband will do that one. Unapologetically, it's a work that looks at motherhood, but you perhaps would be surprised to see how men do exert themselves and male partners do exert themselves in this work. I think it would be a great thing for a man to write. I think it would be not very authentic
I don't think I could do it as a woman to write about some of the challenges of early childhood for men.
In the front.
I actually think that the book's quite balanced from a female-male point of view. That's my personal opinion. Can you tell us a little bit about how differently you approached this book from your previous book?
Did everyone?
The writing process?
Did everyone hear that down the back? How different was the writing process of this novel to Fiona's earlier memoir?
Well, with memoir, obviously I was constrained by the truth, you know. I was writing about myself and, importantly, my husband and the people with whom we shared our lives in Jandowae, population 750 in rural Queensland. So there were a whole bunch of people who would have held me accountable if I strayed from the truth, or at least my version of the truth. But with fiction, it was incredibly liberating. I loved it. I totally got into the process of being able to take a theme that interested me, like maternal rage or intensity of friendships, and just take it to the nth degree, explore it. And there was a lot of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor as a function of that, but I found it very liberating.
Join me in congratulating Fiona on this wonderful novel. Well done.